Welcome to another season of Digging Deeper, a podcast of Perimeter Church in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Senior Pastor Jeff Norris here with my co-host Laura Story Elvington, and we're excited to be back in your earbuds and your streaming platforms. But we're changing things up just a little bit for this short 4-week mini-series that we're calling Unshakable.
We're going to be sitting down with 4 different guests as they share their stories of how walking through a shaky season of life has further revealed the unshakable character of God. And we pray that you'll both find hope and encouragement in these testimonies as you're drawn back to the truth of God's unshakable character in whatever season of life you may be walking through. So let's dig in.
We are thrilled, as always, that you have joined us to engage with us here in this 4th conversation as a part of this series that we're doing called Unshakable. And this one's a little bit of a special treat because sitting next to me is not my usual co-host, Laura. It's my beautiful, awesome wife, Rachel. And Laura's sitting across from me, which is odd because she's not usually there. And she's sitting with her awesome husband, Martin, because we're interviewing them for this episode. And so Laura is changing seats, literally,
roles here.
And roles
Yes.
to be not the one who asks questions, but the one who answers questions and shares, along with Martin, their story. And it was kind of a no-brainer when we were thinking about this idea.
Maybe for you. I feel better as the interviewer.
Yes, yes.
Than the guest.
I'm sure, but no-brainer for me for sure. Of like, okay, knowing you guys, knowing your story, knowing your journey that is still being written, right, as all of ours are. We think about, okay, this whole concept of there's a lot of things in this life that shake us to the core. Yeah. And in the midst of it, as Christians, as followers of Christ, we seek to, even in the midst of the shakenness, experience an unshakable God and the reality of his unshakable kingdom, even when it doesn't feel unshakable. So that's what we're going to talk about, and we want you guys to share your story. And I know, Rachel, you've known Laura and Martin as long as I have, and we've talked a lot about their story and the ways in which God has used it, certainly in your lives and ministries. So where do you want to start, guys? What's the first maybe part you want to share of your story?
Well, I will say this. I kind of joke about how it can be a little awkward sharing our story, but I do love, in a series where we're talking about the things in life that shake us, disability is a big part of our story.
Yeah.
And disability is a big part of our family, obviously of Martin's life, but of anyone in our family. And sometimes I feel like we don't talk about disability enough as believers. I was reading, I think it was a Tim Keller, the foreword to a book on disability that Tim Keller wrote the foreword. And what he said was, sometimes churches know how to pray for someone and they get better and they rejoice with them.
Yeah.
Right. Or they pray and whatever illness ends in that person passing on, and they grieve well with that family. But a lot of times when it comes to something chronic, and people who are listening who have chronic disabilities or chronic illnesses, I'm wondering if maybe I'm speaking for them as well. Sometimes the church doesn't know what to do with it. What do we do with something where we pray for healing, but the Lord answers differently than what we expect?
Yeah, yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, so with that, amen. And
we can start from the beginning if you want.
I want to lean into you guys here. Where do you want to start? In terms of, let's start here.
Well, we were young people when we met.
Yeah,
we grew up in the same.
Wee little lads. Go back to the beginning. When did you guys meet? When did you start dating? Those kind of things.
We actually went to the same kindergarten together.
We did.
So cool.
Wow.
She was a year ahead of me, and so
I'm so much more advanced. No, I'm older. I'm a year older.
I don't think. Real quick, I don't think I ever knew this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm
that
6
y'all were
months
same
older.
kindergarten, same
Yeah.
school,
That's
all
so
that.
fun.
kindergarten, elementary, junior high, and high school. But we actually met for the first time at an FCA cookout Laura's senior year, my junior year of high school.
So earlier, we did a podcast with the Francoeurs, and I mentioned that I am not a very sporty person. And still now we laugh about the fact that we met at this Fellowship for Christian Athletes thing. And I still am not really sure what I was doing there, except that I wanted to fellowship with a good-looking Christian athlete. And it ended up working out for me.
Yeah.
It was a great place
And you met Martin.
for musicians, dorky musicians to meet good-looking guys.
Was this when you had really short hair, by the way?
Yes. We had in high school, we may have to find a picture of this, but we had the same haircut in high school.
Oh, that's funny.
That's awesome. That's got to be in the show notes.
It was your
Yes.
haircut. The
Yeah,
haircut
well,
you
yeah.
have right now
Well,
is what both of us had in
Is
high
this an
school.
okay
wow.
time to mention that my haircut hasn't changed since second grade? So,
I can-
I'm sure
I can
people
have
could
that,
guess
yeah.
that. Anyway, okay, so you guys meet FCA gathering.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what?
Then the next day, we realized that we are sitting at lunch tables that are beside each other.
Yeah, so we just kind of it's interesting because after we met, we kind of traced how we had been like in the vicinity of each other for a good 10, 15 years, going back to even to preschool, and we dated on and off for probably 7 or 8 years, and we're just really good friends for most of that part, and then. After I graduated from college and Martin had been graduated for a couple of years, which even that, I graduated after him, even though I was older than him. It took me a little bit
the same
longer.
college?
No,
Okay.
He went to Wofford College. I went to a Bible college. And then we got married and we came on staff here. We had been married, I think, 1 year and 3 months. So Perimeter is, now we're about to celebrate 20 years. But Perimeter is a huge part of our story, and really kind of taught us how to be the husband and wife we are, the parents we are.
So 1.5 years married before you came on staff here. What? All right. Let's now we'll get into then
Yeah.
the unexpected shaken reality of y'all's story came in. And at what point was that? Was that before you moved here? Or was it after you moved here? When did that take place?
I had some symptoms, very vague symptoms, prior to moving here, but they quickly escalated once I was here. I was in graduate school and began falling asleep in class. I fell asleep one day while driving, and a little bit forgetful.
Yeah.
Now I remember I was on a trip doing music somewhere, and I called Martin to check on him because things had just kind of been off. And I'll never forget, I called him and I could tell I'd just woken him up. And I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" He was like, "I think I was just taking a nap." And then I heard the car door and like the dinging of the car door. I said, "Are you in your car?" And he said, "Yes, I think I just pulled into the parking lot of the condo and fell asleep." And I thought,
Oh, wow.
okay. He said, "And I think I fell asleep on the way home." And I said,
Wow.
"Okay, I'm going to come." I was in Flat Rock, North Carolina. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to come home now and we're going to figure this out."
Yeah.
So it was a few different doctor's visits, and then eventually Martin was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it's never news that anyone expects to hear. I think for us, we were young, mid-20s, and so it wasn't crushing. It was just something we thought, okay, this is an obstacle. I think, if anything, we thought about it in a very naive way. Thought this is an obstacle we're going to need to figure out. He's going to have a surgery, and then we're going to kind of get back on the road that we imagined our lives, to be on. It's like, when they do, I think here at the church they do premarital counseling, and you map out what you want your marriage and family to look like. And so we kind of saw it as kind of a little detour, a little bump in the road. Then we're going to get back to the plan, God's good plan for us.
Yeah.
And do you want to share a little bit about how that ended up looking a little different than what we expected?
Yeah. So the surgery I had saved my life, and forever grateful for the man who did my surgery. I was left with some disabilities that were residual effects from the surgery itself. And today I live with a short-term memory disability, as well as I have about 50% of my eyesight. The tumor itself was attached to my optic nerve, and when they did the surgery to remove it, the optic nerve was damaged, and so I live with about 50% of my eyesight. So I can't drive, but I still get around. I cycle a good bit, and I'll work here at the church. So,
Wow. So what was how did coming out of surgery, kind of what was that like?
Yeah.
Like in the beginning?
Yeah, so in the beginning, like I said, we thought, okay, well, the doctor said we needed to get surgery, and so Martin, had his surgery, and I'll never forget. I tell this story a lot, but when I first got to see Martin after that initial 4.5-hour surgery, the doctor had listed all these potential complications, and one of them was because of where the tumor was, it was a possibility that Martin's entire memory would be wiped. And so as this, young bride, I'm thinking, what if he doesn't remember me? And so I got to see him right after that first surgery. And as soon as kind of he came to and opened his eyes, he said, "Laura Story."
Oh.
I thought, I'm so glad he remembers me. And then he said, "What are you doing here?" and I realized that he knew exactly who I was, but he just didn't know that we were married.
Oh, wow.
He didn't remember anything. He remembered high school. He was like, "Laura, that we went to high school together." And so the more we're in that recovery room together and we're talking, and he's asking me questions about, so what have you been doing since high school? And he said, did you ever get married? And I'm like, yeah, I certainly did. And I finally kind of broke this news to him of, hey, I'm here with you right now because we're married. I'll never forget him, just his jaw dropping and saying, "We're married?" Yes. And I thought, okay, that is really great. That's a really great way for that to go down. I'm not sure, when someone's in such a fragile medical state, I don't know what kind of news they can handle.
What's better than realizing that you married the love of your life once, if not twice?
Yeah, I know. I
"Wait a
reminded him
second."
multiple times.
So what happened with my short-term memory problems? So she would leave the room to go have lunch or even just go to the restroom, and she'd come back in the door, and I would do it again.
Oh, wow.
Not realizing that she had just told me 15 minutes beforehand.
Wow.
That we were married.
So not to make light of a very scary situation, but there is that kind of sweet, man, you get to rediscover it over and over again that, wow, I got to marry this girl, but I'm sure it was not that lighthearted in the moment because you were great concern, right?
Yeah, it was interesting because those first days in the hospital, the doctor said, plan to be here a week or so. And we were there probably the damage that happened due to the surgery, due to how deep they had to go in order to get the tumor. It just caused a lot more problems than what we initially realized. So we were there for about 2.5 weeks. Finally got to leave, but had complications within maybe the first couple of days. Ended up back in the hospital for another 2.5 months.
Oh, wow.
So that was, those were the days that we just weren't sure. We just weren't sure whether Martin would wake up some of those really long nights. And finally, he began to do better. He began, I remember him doing rehab and, learning to walk again, learning to use a fork and a knife, I have this very vivid memory of sitting in the rehab facility at a table. And it was the first time, this is someone who Martin had not been able to eat, and then he had not been able to eat solid food. He was finally eating solid food, but this is the first time he had gotten out of bed in like 2 months in order to eat that solid food. So we're sitting at this cafeteria, and Martin's he's like learning to use his fork and knife again to cut the spaghetti. And probably about a week after that was when he was discharged. And on one hand, I was so grateful that he was being released. I'd been sleeping on this very uncomfortable fold-out chair, which anyone that's spent any time in the hospital knows what that feels like. But on the other hand, it was really confusing because I had this picture in my mind that these medical professionals were going to fix everything before they released us from the hospital. And so it was a hard moment of the doctor saying, Martin is doing really well considering what he's gone through, but there are some things due to the trauma his brain has endured. There are some things that may never get better. And that was hard as a wife to hear. Yeah. That's hard as a Christian. Yeah. Just as a person. But yeah, that's kind of part of what we've had to navigate, I guess, for 17 years now.
Martin, what do you feel even now when you hear Laura share that? And when you think about the daily reality of life with the story that God has written and is writing for you?
I have probably two conflicting emotions. One would be, let me say this. I when I became a Christian, I was involved in a Bible study where we learned about the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God, and I remember learning for the first time in a Bible study setting that God is no less good when hard things happen. And so learning that academically is very different than experiencing that in reality. Yeah. And so I'm forever grateful for the foundational knowledge I had about God, because it led me to a place eventually, it took time, but eventually where I could reconcile a good God allowing a very difficult circumstance. Scripture says he causes all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And so so despite it being incredibly difficult, we still saw and have seen and continue to see the good that has come from my disability.
Yeah.
Were you tempted, to just like what, when stuff like that happens, obviously you're 17 years into it, but in the beginning, like what were some of the hardest things to just trust the Lord with, or were there lies you believed about him or yourself?
And I want you to answer that, but something interesting about disability, like you say, you're 17 years into it. Some days it doesn't even feel like we're a day into it.
Yeah.
Because with every year, with every season of our marriage, season of our family, there's something new that pushes up against that disability. And it's almost like we kind of go through it all over again.
Yeah.
What would you say?
The loss of independence, I think, would be an overarching theme of what I experience. Whether that's I'm not able to drive now because of my disability, so not able to go to the grocery store and get a gallon of milk. Not able to take my kids out on a father-daughter or father-son experience. Those are difficult things. Now I want to quickly say the men and women of our church have been amazing in regard to those two specific things I just mentioned. We have very, very good friends in this church who come alongside our family and help out with those kind of things. Right. And so I do get to experience those things. It just looks different.
Yeah.
I was in the other thing, I was in graduate school, and I had to drop out of graduate school because of my memory disability. So short-term memory disability manifests itself almost like as a learning disability, in that it's difficult to make new memories. Yeah. So learning new information is a difficult task. So I was on a trajectory towards a certain occupation, and all of that just stopped. Yeah. So and it was a trajectory that I had prayed about and sought counsel over, and had lots of affirmation from folks within the body of Christ saying, yes, this looks like where God may be leading you. And so to find out I have a brain tumor and a disability, or resulting disability from the surgery, to find that out, and to find out that what I was certain was God's plan was actually not.
Yeah.
Was a very difficult.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me say this to you, Martin. You mentioned how many in the church have been a blessing to you and to Laura. But I want you to hear, man, how much of a blessing you've been to so many in the church. Yeah. And Laura mentioned at the beginning that you work here and you work in our cafe here at the church. And man, you really are such a blessing to so many. And I don't just say that. I mean, you always have a smile on your face. You're always doing your job and serving others with gladness. And people notice and people are affected by you. And so it goes both ways. Let me ask you this. What are some things, just speaking very practically here, what are some things that y'all do to help you with the short-term memory disability? Like, Laura, are there things that you do to help him remember some things? Martin, what are some things that you do to, do you carry your phone around and put notes in your phone to make sure you remember when you have conversations? I'm curious about how you do that.
Yeah, exactly. I use a smartphone and just take lots of notes. I use my calendar app a lot to write things down, so that at the end of the day, when we're talking or something, and Laura says, "How was your day?" and if I don't immediately remember what my day looked like, I can look back at my calendar and look what I did, and those are triggers that will help me, not just so that I can answer the question, but it really does help me remember what I did that day. And if I see a note that had lunch with John, then it will trigger the conversation, and I'm able to bring it back up and have the conversation with my wife. Yeah. So I use I write down a lot of things, make a lot of notes, and
you're like an Uber Gold member.
So
and he's always like the best, sweetest encouragement to all these Uber drivers all the time. It's really sweet.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I'd say one of the things you talked about is the limitations and all of that. But one thing that's been interesting, well, two things. First of all, I feel like early on, the first 5 years, I feel like we weren't even being honest with ourselves about how this affected us. I think we thought that the good Christian answer is, God's working all things together for good. He's going to do something beautiful out of this mess. All of those things that you could, you'd write on distressed wood panel and put up in your living room. Like, we've kind of felt like that needed to be our token line that we shared. So I'd say the first 5 years, we didn't grieve it well. We didn't grieve it very well. And we got to a place where we realized that we hadn't. And so we almost had to kind of go back and experience some of the sadness of, in the scriptures, the psalmist would call it lament. Just kind of acknowledging this world is broken and disability is hard. Because along with the limitations, all of that it's been a lot to deal with. But disability also involves a lot of unmet expectations. You think about a mother who's picturing a child, has that child, finds out about a certain condition or something, and even though they love that child, just as much as they would a completely healthy child, there is that expectation, and sometimes people feel guilty calling it what it is. Right. There's brokenness in this world. For whatever reason, God has not chosen to miraculously heal Martin. So we had to take time to kind of be sad about it. And we still have those moments. It's not like we've moved on from that season. Right. But we also, as we've processed it, we've come to a place of saying, okay, God, we do trust you, and we do believe that you take that which the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. We have hard days, and then we have days that we really can see the good things that God is doing in and through Martin's disability.
Yeah, and I would say with that, the one thing I've always read into that verse that's not there is that you necessarily see see or even
this side of heaven,
or that you even experience the good this side of heaven, and or that the good necessarily happens directly to the person who had the hard thing. Oftentimes God will do something, through the circumstance in the lives of other people that are around, and so I've been shaped by that verse since my brain tumor in a way that has taught me to redefine what that looks like.
That's good, man.
Yeah.
Rachel, maybe one last question from you, and then I'll close us out with a question.
Well, just talking about the grief and how you even said 17 years in, some days are just like a new day. So I think if you have a child with disabilities or a spouse, like you're saying, there is that cycle of grief that probably doesn't end. There are different sets of grief for different seasons, right? As your family changes, as you age, those kind of things. Talk about that. Like, how do you continue to persevere?
Yeah. I can share this. Like, you even mentioned family. At first, when Martin and I, when we began to really accept, okay, this is not a detour. This is the road. This is not something that was just part of our story for this year, and then we're going to move on to the next season. This is part of our story for the long haul. As we began to grieve that, there were a lot of dreams that we had to let die. But one of the neat things was we kind of assumed that one of those dreams was us having children. And you guys know, just like you guys, Martin and I have 4 children. Right. And us, we just kept on praying that God would take away that desire. And then we actually had people come to us and say, hey, just because of Martin's disability, that doesn't mean that you guys can't be parents. Right. And so we've kind of, we kind of stepped forward into that and had our own journey with infertility, and then ended up, have these 4 amazing kids. But I'll never forget when Josie she was probably 3 or 4 years old. She's 11 now. But when she was 3 or 4 years old, I was having just a hard day, just struggling with, why does our life have to look this way? God, I knew you could heal Martin just with the snap of a finger. And so often, especially with children, we think about how Martin's disability me working full time, like all of everything that is our family, how these things are detrimental to our children. And I was having one of those days of thinking about what Josie's life could look like if Martin could drive, if if my life looked different. And I was picking her up from preschool, and her teacher said, "Hey, can I speak to you for a second?" And I'm like terrified. I'm like, good grief, what did you do this time? But she called me aside and she said, "Hey, I want to brag on your little girl for a second." Mm-hmm. She said, "We have a new boy in our class who has some learning differences, and Josie, for whatever reason, has just come alongside and is just his little buddy. And she helps him do this and she helps him do that. And she's just so patient with him." She said, "I wanted to ask you, what have you done to develop in your children this care for people with learning differences?" Oh. And it was like the Lord just, like, he just showed it to me so clearly. And I was able to say to her, well, it's funny you should say that. I have not done a single thing, but I don't know if you know that Josie's dad has a disability, and she's never known anything different. And it was so sweet, just this realization that sometimes the limitations of our family or the limitations of us as parents, we think that they're to the detriment of our children. Right. But really, sometimes they're the very things that God is using to develop character. And it was just like a few weeks later, I'm reading in Romans 5, and Paul says, "Rejoice in your sufferings," which, I kind of roll my eyes whenever, Paul, whatever. Yeah. But he says, "Rejoice in your sufferings because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character. And character produces hope, and hope will not disappoint." Mm-hmm. And it was this realization of the very character that I want to see in our children, the very endurance that I want to see in our children. It's not going to come necessarily from, signing them up from the right Sunday school class, right, as much as it's going to come from them having to endure some hardship that's part of the story that God's writing for our whole family. So
man, okay, that's like a whole nother episode right there that we need to have for parents. And Rachel and I need to remind ourselves of this often, because what is the default reaction of a parent? Is to do everything you can to remove the obstacles, to protect them. I mean, this is what I want to do constantly, especially for my girls, right? Like with my son, you're a little bit more, dads and their sons are a little bit more like, hey, you got this. With dads and their daughters, you want to protect and, hey, make sure nothing's in the way of that might cause you to stumble or suffer. And yet it's those things that are the most character building realities that, bring about endurance and hope. I'm still going to bring it up, but because there might be more. Because you really went where I was going to wrap us up with, and that is, and Laura, you will love that I'm bringing this up. You have written a lot of great songs. For anyone who might be listening that doesn't realize that Laura is a Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter, and the song you won a Grammy for, I mean, you truly, so many great songs, but the one that did warrant that was Blessings. I think God honored that song for a lot of reasons. One, it was brilliantly written and sung, and it resonates with so many people, but I think it came from the depths of your heart and Martin's heart, even, as y'all have wrestled through this and trusted God through this. And so my thought is, you can correct me. I've listened to it truly so many times, Rachel and I both, but I'm probably going to misquote it here. But, what if your blessings came through raindrops? What if something came through tears?
Healing.
Healing came through tears. Thank you. And that's part of the chorus. So my question is, you've shared that with Josie, but what are some of the blessings that you've seen as a result of this that you wouldn't have seen otherwise?
I'll let you go first.
One thing I mentioned earlier about the church and my formative years as a young Christian, learning about what the church should be and should do and what it looks like. And I came to understand that we care for those who are sick and those who are in need. And oftentimes, I can recall being the one who would offer aid and come to the aid of someone in need, but I had never been the recipient of someone in need to the degree that I've now experienced since my current condition. And so it has been a humbling experience. It's also been an eye-opening experience to see the body of Christ come alongside us specifically and come to our aid, offer help. And I understand that verse in a different way today than I did as when I first came to the Lord.
Sure. Yeah. That's good.
That's great.
Laura, anything you would add?
Yeah. I'll answer it with I know this is a heavy topic. I'll end it on a funny story. So you mentioned the Grammys, and Martin and I, we got the invitation. We heard about the nomination, got the invitation, really had no intention of going, except that I was already in LA the Friday night before the Sunday night of the Grammys. So we just extended our plane ticket, and I was 5 months pregnant with Josie. We didn't know anything about the Grammys. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever gone to the Grammys. No. We didn't know anything, and so I was in, with it being my first pregnancy, I was just hungry all the time. So I'll never forget us going to Subway and getting a foot-long sub and smuggling it into the Grammys.
Nice.
That's the best story.
And like munching on it during that pre-show. But the reason I bring it up is so I'm sitting there, and when they called my name and I went up and accepted it, one thing they do, so you accept the award, and then they kind of whisk you off backstage, and you go around the corner and you're on another stage with all of the news outlets. Okay. Yeah. So if you can imagine, like, you turn the corner and there's someone with a Newsweek, USA Today. It literally is everybody. Every publication, media outlet you've ever thought of. And, they're more excited about interviewing Taylor Swift, I'm sure. But for me, they just asked me one question. And they said, so your song, what we understand, your song was written about your faith. Tell us about that. I just thought it was so interesting. Mm-hmm. You think about the passage in 1 Peter that says, always be ready to give an answer when people ask you about, the faith you have. And it made me think that it was really this trial that we've walked through that we don't necessarily understand, but that's the platform. That's the reason people are asking us about the faith that we have. It's not, that we won the lottery and they're like, tell us about God, in the midst of that. Yeah. It's that we've walked through something and still have found peace, have found joy. We certainly have hard moments, but really, that's what faith is about. Mm-hmm. It's about stepping forward and trusting God to be who He is, trusting that He loves us, trusting that He has a good plan for us, even when it doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. So it's been a neat experience to write songs from that place and even get to share about it on podcasts like this.
Yeah, awesome. It occurs to me, I've never been to the Grammys. I did have a high school football banquet, and I'm thinking those are pretty similar,
There's a
right?
lot more music at the Grammys.
Yeah. Other than that, they're probably really similar.
Very similar.
And, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna
maybe on a different episode you can share with us about your accolades.
Oh, yeah. So that'll last.
The high school football banquet.
Yeah. So that episode will be 45 seconds. It'll be riveting. So anyway, Rachel, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know you don't love doing things like this, but you're great at it, and I love having you with me. So thanks for.
I may replace you as the. I think that she's. I think we need the.
Laura, you're great. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be opposed. Martin, thanks for joining us as well, man.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we love y'all and so grateful for you. And we've loved doing this series of Unshakable, and hope it's been a blessing to you and to all who have listened and engaged with us here. And we'll be coming back soon with more Digging Deeper episodes in the coming weeks and months. So join us for those as well.